As I listened back through the episodes that I posted, on one area where I misspoke or I used the wrong term, I referred to every seventh year as the year of Jubilee, when in fact, every seventh year was the Sabbath year, and every seventh Sabbath year was the year of Jubilee. So the year of Jubilee did fall on a Sabbath year, but not every Sabbath year was a year of Jubilee. So the law in Exodus 21 was referring to releasing slaves every Sabbath year, and that may be the year of Jubilee, but it doesn't have to be. It's just every seventh year. That's all. I just want to speak straight. I don't want to misspeak on any of these terms that the Bible uses. I was speaking off memory on that one, and I want to correct it now. It doesn't change anything. They still were released on every seventh year, but that seventh year was called the Sabbath year, not necessarily the year of Jubilee. So anyway, I want to continue on Exodus 21, starting in verse 7, to finish up this passage on concubines. We've already gone over verse 7 saying, when a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do, meaning she doesn't leave on the Sabbath year. She stays in the household. And we see this enacted for every man in the Bible that had a concubine. He didn't send her out necessarily on the Sabbath year. He sent her away for some other reason, or he didn't have to send her out, but she stayed indefinitely. But the other portion of this verse, when it says, when a man sells his daughter, the idea of a man selling his daughter, I know I've been harping on a lot the difference between a concubine and a wife throughout this series, but that doesn't mean there aren't any similarities between a wife and a concubine. There is some similarity, and this is one right here, where a man could buy from a family a woman as a wife or as a concubine. And when it says to buy, what it means is he pays the family a dowry. A dowry for a bride, it was called the bride price for virgins. With brides, the payment for a bride was associated with her virginity, which is why in Exodus 22, when a man seduces a virgin, whether that man marries her or not, at the decision of the father, whether nullifying the daughter's decision or not, that man still has to pay a bridal price, a dowry for virgins to the father, regardless of if he marries her or not, because he still took her virginity. But he could also pay for a concubine. I believe that dowry paid for concubines was associated in the same way that the bride price was associated with paying for a virgin bride. I also believe that the dowry paid to the family for a concubine was associated with paying for a virgin concubine. The reason I believe this is because in Deuteronomy 21, as we went over already, the man, when he releases the concubine or sends her away, it prohibits him from selling her to anybody or treating her as a slave anymore because she's free. But he cannot sell her for money or accept the dowry because the reason given is he has humbled her. Again, the euphemism for having sex with her for the first time. And because he has done that, he has no right to sell her to anybody or accept a dowry for giving her to somebody. So he can't accept money for her, and he has to let her go free. That's why I think that once a man has sex with a concubine, he can no longer continue to sell her or make money off of her. That is her freedom if he ever separates from her. She is either returned to her family, redeemed, or goes free. And whether she's returned to her family or goes free is just dependent on if she has a family. In Deuteronomy 21, she had no family to go to because that was a woman from among a captive people from a conquered country whose family had perished in the battle or didn't have a family. I encourage you to go look at Numbers 30. It might be helpful when we're talking about transactions for women as concubines or wives, because Numbers 30 goes over the vow or oath or word that a woman makes. And if she's under some sort of head, either her own father in his household or under the household of her husband, then the husband or father, the head in her life, has the right to nullify whatever vow she makes. So that doesn't mean she can't make any vows. She can, but she has to make it in accordance with what her head also says. If she doesn't have a head in her life, whether she be a widow or a divorcee, or in modern times, just a woman who left her father's house because she grew too old and never got married, as many single women are in the Western world today, which wasn't common at all in ancient Israel, not being under the head of a man, are able to make oaths and vows that they are held accountable for because there's not a head in their life to nullify that vow. So that teaches us two things, okay? It teaches us that women were involved in the decision-making process of who they were given to, whether as a concubine or as a bride, what man they were given to. It didn't say they couldn't make any vows. It just said that the father had the right to nullify it. So that shows us that there was a joint decision being made between the father and the daughter on who she would go to, on which man the family would accept a dowry for her hand in marriage or for her hand in concubinage. And we see this also happening in the life of Israel. For example, Rebekah's father, he was giving to the servant of Isaac her hand in marriage whenever Isaac's servant approached him. And he said, we're not going to stop God if this is from God that Isaac is looking for a wife. He can have Rebekah. But whenever the servant of Isaac raises the stakes and says, I should leave with her now and we need to go back to my master, it changes the dynamic because Rebekah's father understood that he would stay a little longer and they could enjoy the company of their daughter before she goes off to a foreign land. And to make the final decision, he calls Rebekah and says, Rebekah, you make the choice. So this joint decision being made is seen in the Bible. Now, it's true that the father, the head of who is over the woman, takes precedence. But a good father will incorporate the desires of his daughter. And a good daughter will take into consideration the wisdom and guidance of her good father. Okay? This idea that women were thrown to men without regard to what they wanted, by their fathers for money and by the men as if it was some sort of a human trafficking scandal, is not at all what the text communicates, either in the law, as we look at in Numbers 30, nor in the practice of Israelites, as we see with Rebekah, Isaac, and as we see in Judges 19, as we've already said. And if it ever did cross that line, it was a scandal. It was a scandal. There were consequences of it. Consequences to atone for that scandal. So that was what the association was there. Now that was a lot for verse 7 of Exodus 21, but let's move on.